Rolling. G'day, Ben.
Hey, Ben. How are you? I'd say happy Easter, but when this episode goes out, could be a bit afterwards, but that's all right. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter. Yes. So, how was it for you?
Yeah, good. I went down to Inverloch for a little bit with my family, which was nice. The kids are actually still down there, so got a quiet household for a couple of days, which is awesome. That's the school holidays for you.
Good excuse to jump in the studio and listen to some tunes.
That's it.
With the kids away.
That's it. And other than that, just been doing some work. Just worked on it was a TVC. Nothing special, just a bit of dialogue, some sound effects and some music. So pretty straightforward gig.
Nice.
But yeah, other than that, just hanging out with the wife. Had a lovely meal out with her just before, which was nice. So I'm stuffed and ready to chat.
Awesome.
We'll go to sleep probably. Yeah. What about yourself? What did you do on the weekend?
This Easter was actually quite a fun one. My father and I decided to work on a guitar amp that he had in his teens that hasn't been turned on in 35 to 40 odd years. Ooh. So we thought we would pull it apart and tinker with it and get it working. And
after that many years, did it make a noise when you turned it on?
You know what? To be honest, it was surprisingly quiet when we turned it on. For at least the first 20 minutes, and then it started making some funny sounds and started to get a bit quiet. So we turned it off and then pulled it all apart and started problem solving with it and
nice.
Seeing what components were starting to go bad and whatnot. And I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to electronics and the inside of amps like that, but my dad is pretty clued on when it comes to tinkering with circuitry and stuff. So I learned a lot. It was a cool weekend to really understand how the insides of these guitar amps work. And we've got it mostly working. It's now back and playable, but we need to fix the reverb tank and a few other bits and pieces to get it working. But yeah, it was definitely a fun project.
Yeah, it sounds like a good bonding session with your dad as well. That would have been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we're both guitar lovers and music lovers. So it was, a really cool experience. And it was a bit average weather over the weekend too. So to be sipping tea and inside tinkering with guitar things is, one of my favorite things to do, to be honest.
sounds like a great Easter weekend.
Yeah,
lovely.
Absolutely.
Well, let's just dive right into it, I reckon. So we've decided that today we did a film for our last podcast. And so today we're going to talk about some music, which you've selected. I'd never heard of this artist before, but was a huge fan. I quite liked what we heard. But I think in that discussion, talking about music, our main topic, let's talk about, singles versus albums would be a great chat because really, last week we talked about streaming killing the cinema or whether it killed the cinema. But I guess it's a great question of did streaming kill the album? Because for me and Sarah, on my 30th birthday, I got a record player and decided that, records was going to be a part of my life now. And even it was a great opportunity to dive back to some classic music that I either hadn't heard much of or I probably didn't get the education I would have liked from my parents. Funnily enough, though, we had my parents over for a meal when we first got it, and we got a bunch of records. And I was like, "Oh, Dad, why don't you pick some music while we have a meal?" And he was going through the list of albums. He's like, "Oh, I used to have this one. I used to have this one." And I was like, "Where was my education?" I feel like all I got and I'm not sure anyone listening will know, but I got Tina Arena and John Farnham. I'm not complaining. John Farnham, the voice, is awesome, but I basically listened to the same two albums from my dad, and it's like, where's my education? But there's something about with vinyl is getting the vinyl, having this beautiful big artwork, and even then we would feature, put up pieces of the album around the house or whatever, and it looks like art, and you get to look at it, you read through who wrote things and recorded it. And then you just, with vinyl, once it's on, you can't really just go skipping tracks, right? So it's about the whole experience. And these days with streaming, you just don't have that as much, right? The streaming services these days just select tracks for you, or they might run on to just different albums. I guess for you, what do you think about the fact that streaming's kind of changed things in that sense?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I never got into the record playing experience that much, even though I do really enjoy a record when I'm at a friend's house who has a collection and puts it on. I think streaming, however, it gives you all the options in terms of if you want to listen to an album from start to finish, that's available to you. If you prefer to listen to a playlist and have a mix of different artists all in the one session, that's also an option for you. I know talking to a bunch of friends of mine, most of them don't listen to an album from start to finish anymore. Most of them are jumping into a playlist that's either curated by the platform or by another music fan who's curated a playlist that they've subscribed to, or they've made their own playlist of songs that they like and on different genres and whatnot for different occasions. I personally, as a music lover, still love albums and listening through an album in order in one sitting. So I kind of like a movie and like what I like. Like last week we spoke about me loving the idea of going to the movies as a singular thing, as a monotasking and really falling into the movie and getting immersed. I like the same thing with albums is sometimes it takes one or two tracks to really get into this singular flow and slow down your mind so you're not thinking about the day that's just happened. But albums can take you out of this current time and make you very present. Yeah. But I also love a playlist that's shuffling through great tracks as well. So it's a funny question. I like both. I think a lot of people are moving towards the playlist side of things, but I think there's still a handful of those album lovers out there who like to listen in order of an album. And
I definitely, for me, it's depending the artist and stuff as well. Like I've always been a big Carnival fan. They're from Perth, a progressive metal band, and I feel like their music's meant to be consumed as an album. It's like they work so hard to just make it flow and all that sort of stuff. But again, I'm the same. I'm happy to kind of consume both. When I'm listening to music with my girls or whatever, ends up being a playlist of pop tunes that they can sing along to. But yeah, it is what it is. So for yourself, you mix or particularly master tracks, and you told me the other day that you these days just mostly do singles, and I think you've even talked about it in the podcast. So clearly, like artists appreciating being able to just put out a great track, spend time on the one track, make it good, and see if it blows up.
Yeah.
Do you like
right.
you don't mind working like that? Like, because mastering, I guess, in a sense, was the key thing for mastering back in the day. Well, one of the main reasons mastering was a thing is to make that flow happen, make sure the gaps are right, and make sure each track is the same level. So you can't really do that now when singles are a thing. But it all, I guess, depends on the artist that you're working with, right?
Yeah, it absolutely does. So you're right. A lot of the work that I'm doing for artists at the moment is singles. Occasionally you do get an album or an EP. Mostly EPs are from newer bands who've written a couple of songs. I think the push for singles is actually coming mostly from marketing and distribution agencies, labels. Yeah. The benefits of singles is that you're giving your audience and your fan base full attention on one track. So when you release a single, you're kind of promoting it, you're putting all your steam into that one track, and it comes out into the world, giving all your fans an opportunity to really love the track. And I don't know if you feel this, but when you listen to an album of an artist that you've been waiting for the next album to come out, you'll listen through once, and you'll pick your favorite track and you'll pick your second favorite track, and you'll binge listen to those two tracks mostly. And then a lot of the other tracks often will fall off your radar from being listened to. You'll just kind of pick those two favorites or so, or maybe three, depending on how many tracks you love, and you'll just abuse them over and over and over again. So I think in terms of the economy of scale, a lot of advice from music marketers is that singles get more runtime. But what I also love is something that I'm seeing more and more of, and I'm also seeing that in Olivia Dean's album that we're going to talk a bit about today. She's releasing an album this June, so it's not completely out yet. So June 30, new Messy. The album's called Messy, new album. She is releasing singles leading up to the album launch, and seems that she may even, this is a speculation, I haven't spoken to her personally, but I wouldn't be surprised if she almost releases every track on the album as we get closer. So she's kind of doing both things. She's giving an album to the people who want an album. And I think an album can be really powerful if you're curating a feeling or a genre or a moment in time that you as an artist want to express something. An album is a great way to have a body of work that takes you through a story, through all the different emotions and all the different mindsets that you might be in as an artist. And if you release them individually leading up to an album, you're giving each track the opportunity to be loved by your fans. So say you release a track today, it's out there for 2-3 weeks, getting a lot of hype, or your fans are like, love this track, woo, let's share it around. And then by then, it's still a great track, but people are like, oh, what's the next thing?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they release another track and you're like, oh, there's another track here. That's great. Now they get two weeks of runtime and then another track. And it kind of builds that momentum to the big album launch. And I think that's a cool way of doing it because you're getting the benefits of both worlds.
Yeah, I found it interesting because you said to me that this is what was happening with the album, and I looked it up, and I appreciate the way, and I didn't check on Spotify, but on Apple Music, that the album's there. It's obviously the tracks that you can't listen to are grayed out, so you know what's coming as well and how many tracks are on the album and stuff, so it builds that anticipation. But it's cool that they're doing it that way rather than just releasing, because I know a bunch of guys will release a single and it's just its own album within that streaming service. But it's cool that you see that what's to come, how many tracks are there, and you're right. Like it would be, I assume that that's the way she's going to do it. It's just cool to be able to release them as she goes, and maybe June 30 here's the last track of the whole album, like at that point we've got all of them there. Yeah, sweet. Well, do you want to talk about the album then? Let's
talk about the album. Absolutely. I've been listening to this album, the few tracks that have been released from this album so far, quite a lot lately.
Yeah.
So I've been a fan of Olivia's music for quite a while. I think I discovered her maybe 2 years ago. Yeah. She did a YouTube video live concert release from the Jazz Lounge in the UK. And it was a live recording. I just stumbled on it when I was researching live recordings for the work that I do down at the Art Centre. And she was just one of the artists that popped up when I was literally just typed in live recording into a YouTube search.
Yeah.
And immediately connected with her music and thought, these are some great tunes. And been following her through her latest EP and a bunch of singles leading up to this album and the singles that she's released from it. And this album's really interesting to me. The singles that she's released so far have felt a little bit different to what she's been doing lately, and what I really like about it is clearly the producers and the engineers working with her and her band are really thinking carefully about what supports the song and what serves the song. Yeah. I love a lot of music, but however, I do feel that these days there's a lot of arrangements and there's a lot of music that's added into a song that doesn't necessarily serve the story or serve the singer or serve the groove. Yeah. But I feel like so far from what I've heard of this album, it all feels very intentional, which I really like. And there's a lot of influences from the past, like music from the past. There's a lot of old hip hop feels. There's a lot of cool harmony writing that we haven't heard as much in modern music, with a great element of modern as well in there, so modern techniques and other things too.
I haven't listened to anything before this album because, you didn't spring this one on me. You've been telling me for probably a couple of weeks now to listen to her. But obviously I've really only intensely listened mostly for the podcast, but I will now go back through her back catalogue. Interesting that you say that she's kind of changed her vibes a bit. But talking about that kind of modern and a bit of the old vibes that she must have been going on, one thing that I noted and I loved is it sounds like there's a lot of it all sounds real elements or real instruments, even though it's kind of got great hip hop / sort of R&B vibes, even like with the beat and stuff like that. It sounds like a real drummer. There's horns and other things. It's almost like a small big band kind of vibe, but it has, even with the beats, although it's real, it must be looped or something to give it that sense of it's almost an electronic or a drum machine, but it's not, because all the elements there are clearly from real instruments, but they've produced them and recorded them in a way that kind of almost feels drum machine, but, it still has that real feel, the soul of actual instruments and stuff, which I found fantastic. And I look forward to sort of listening to the rest of her stuff for, just to see how it's progressed. But it's just whoever's produced it, we probably should have looked up these details of, you might know them, but of who produced it and stuff, because I just think they've nailed it. Like there's, I'm trying to remember, I think it was what was the second track? Was it Dive? The second track, Dive, there was just in the chorus some really cool, just subtle horn parts, just playing some sort of big sort of staccato-y rhythmic stuff in the background, and it just sounded beautiful. It wasn't even dominating at all. It was very subtle. You probably wouldn't even notice it if you weren't listening for it. But they're just, really cool that they've used real instruments but generated this almost synthetic sound or vibe to it. But a good balance, you know what I mean?
You're so right. I think I love recorded instruments and I love real instruments and I love listening to performances.
Yeah.
That's something that I get a lot of satisfaction from, and that's what I'm looking for too when I'm exploring for new artists, new music. I don't mind electronic music. I don't mind computer music, but there's something that connects me as a musician myself to musicians playing and performing and being captured. And this album has a lot of that. And you're right, it's a great mix of live recordings and manipulated in certain ways that does have like a modern twist on it, which I do really, really like. So at the time of speaking, there's 4 tracks released on this album. UFO, which is the opening track of the album, which was, I think, released maybe like 3 and a bit weeks ago. I remember I was on a film shoot with Kaz Creations, stepping in as a cinematographer for them for a day. And I just finished the shift and got to the car and I looked at my phone, put it on the charger, and it came up, Apple Music notified me that this track had been released, this single. And I was excited because I hadn't heard a new track from Olivia for quite a while. So I just sat there in a car and no joke, I probably listened to the song like 7 times before I even started driving because I was just captivated by it. Really cool track, really cool story, the way that she was expressing the complex feelings of feeling like a UFO on Earth, feeling like you don't know where you belong or where you want to land and that kind of stuff. But it's a really cool concept, and the production that they put on it was really interesting.
Yeah, it was good.
Some really cool vocal effects to give you that alien.
Yeah, the vocode, the doubled
vocoder
vibes and stuff. Yeah, it's interesting you talk about the lyrics. Like I did kind of notice in that song, that what she was singing about, but my catchphrase, unofficial catchphrase is I don't do words because I've never written lyrics. I don't really sing. I've always just like created music and done like, with other groups that I've worked with, I always just do the music, send it off, and they do all the vocals. And honestly, like even my favorite band, Carnival, as I've already talked about, I still to this day, I could sing a lot of it because I've heard it so many times, but still don't know every lyric or anything like that. But I could sing you and mouth every instrument and layer to like every single layer that's in there. I could like sing along to it because I am very much about the music and the tones and the licks and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I was a big fan of the vocode. Interestingly though, that with that opening track, it didn't set the tone for me at all. Obviously, like it is an instrument. It's an intro track in the sense that it's got a very much an intro track vibe. It kind of builds something up, bit of anticipation. But then when the tracks started dropping, when I got to the second or third, I'm not saying that they weren't connected, but to me, it didn't set the tone for what the album was going to be, not in a bad way. It was, it felt like a cool intro track and it was beautiful in its own right. But I just found it interesting that when the first track came in, the dropped a great groove. And as I said, it's kind of almost like a big band with all the different instruments in there and stuff. Only because there's like clearly a horn section in throughout some of it, and there's a rhythm section and stuff. But it was just interesting that, I'm not saying, as I said, it's not disconnected, but it just was a weird start, but in a great way. Like I loved it.
It's a really good point.
It was a cool like intro track, but it could almost fit on most albums because there's not many elements within it. There's some great atmospheric vibes and pads, and her vocal, with that doubled vocoder. It, as I said, it has that great intro track vibe, but didn't set the tone. But also, as someone who's never heard her music before, it was just. I observed that there was a bit weird, but still not saying it's
It's-
bad, but
It's a good point because it
Yeah.
is quite a departure from the second track and the other two tracks on the album that she's released so far. I think it's I almost feel like that track is the stitch between her previous
Yeah, okay.
work and
Yeah.
this album.
Yeah.
But you're right. If you were to just go to this album, just hear the first track and then listen to the second track, it's not immediately obvious wait, what is this album going to be like? Because they are quite different.
yeah. But to me, it actually sounds like a cool track for her to go, here's my new album, and play that first. That's a cool, like, it's almost a bit mysterious and its own entity in a way, but it is that kind of what's to come next, you know? And then obviously if I just listen to the whole album from start to finish, I probably wouldn't even feel that way as much. But, you know, anyway, it was just an observation.
And it is a short track, about 2.5 minutes or so. So it does leave one of the things I thought, and maybe the reason I listened to it so many times when I first listened to it, is that it kind of leaves you wanting a bit more.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
You know, like not giving too much away in the track. Actually, looking at the track list, out of all the 4 songs that she's released, 3 of them haven't even made 3 minutes in length. So short and sweet album.
Which is the way to go. As you say, you want to leave people wanting more, right? So the fact that you listened to it like 7 times before you left, you know, drove away in your car makes sense, you know, and that is, for you, you're just sitting there going, all right, I want the album now, you know, you've heard that track and like, you know,
Yeah,
you ruined it
I
for
didn't
yourself
actually.
in a way, but
I actually didn't know that it was part of an album when I saw that single dropped. I thought it was just a single, so I wasn't necessarily expecting more from that body of work. But it definitely felt like something new from what she's been doing, but also linked to her older stuff. Her previous EP that I also really like had some really simple, intimate songs, a lot of simple arrangements, not too much bandy stuff. It was kind of more her beautiful piano with some cool synths dancing around and stuff. So,
which that is in that vibe, right? So you're right. It's good bridge to.
It's the bridge. The bridge for sure.
Yeah, I like that.
And then Dive's second track. So let's talk about Dive a little bit, because I know you obviously have a surround sound set up at your space, so you can truly listen to Dolby Atmos, whereas in my studio I'm set up in stereo, so I've been enjoying the record in stereo. I've been enjoying the record on Dolby Atmos on my AirPods, my Apple AirPods, which do a Dolby Atmos sort of setup as well through the iPhone. But how did you feel the track Dive, the second track on the album? How did that come out in Atmos for you in your space?
Yeah, well, I actually wouldn't mind talking sort of generally overall about the sound of sort of Dolby and stuff. Like for me, Dive, like amazing groove. It sounded great. Like for me, the whole album, and you know, each track is similar in its nature when it was how it was mixed. So a lot of the BVs, which has got heaps of beautiful textures throughout. So there's lots of like sort of long notes, almost like pad vocals. And there's like her obviously just harmonizing with herself. And most of that is in the sides, which is very popular these days. So you have your main vocal sitting at the front, and then you fill the room, and which you obviously, like I listened to stereo, the spatial audio with my AirPods as well as in my room. And unfortunately, you don't get that amazing sense of being surrounded unless you just have all the speakers. But overall, each song had a few different elements within Dolby Atmos. So I think I'll just jump around a bit, but with Danger, the other track, it starts with a bit of a drum loop, and that starts kind of in the room and draws to the front as the main beat comes in, which is heavy at the front from that part on. But overall, like it's not overly used, the Dolby sort of using the surrounds and stuff, but a lot of the modern music is like that these days. They're like using it not subtly. It's not subtle, but it's well used. You know what I mean? Like you feel a sense of being surrounded by a bunch of singers and stuff, and it really worked.
There is an element too, I imagine, when mixing in Dolby Atmos for music, similar to movies that we spoke about last episode, is that there does need to be a little bit of justification as to why you might put something behind you. And I think from what I've heard in your studio, and I had some extra speakers in my studio a couple of weeks back just testing some stuff out, is, you know, vocals and backing vocals and harmonies and effects are really exciting to have around you.
Yeah.
Also transition sounds, sometimes extra guitar parts and things like that, extra shakers and percussion can be really interesting to throw behind you or past the speakers left, right.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't really make sense all the time to maybe put like a bass guitar back there or a drum kit back there unless it was an intro.
Yeah.
So there's only like so much you can do that might be accepted.
Yeah, and it's the same. It's a discussion they had, with film, even when that went to Dolby Atmos as well. I think back in the day when we went from stereo to 5.1 surround sound, too many people were like, this is amazing. I'm going to like put things here and there. And then they quickly realize if you're in a cinema and you're watching something in 5.1 and someone starts talking and they're talking from over there, everyone goes like that. And then you're not watching the screen anymore. So they very intentionally, it corrected itself pretty quick. I think we talked about this with film because it's the same when we went from mono to stereo. And back in the very early days, the mixer only had center, left, right. They didn't have percentages. So it was like they'd put, if you listen to, I think it's Beatles and stuff, there's heaps of Beatle tracks where it's like bass is over here, drums are over here, and it was just, it felt disconnected. And you're right. I think a lot of it, like when Dolby became a thing, everyone was smart enough to go, let's take this in our stride. Let's not do anything too over the top. And obviously there's certain genres that are going to call for that. Like I'd say EDM, a lot of dance music. You could probably afford to have more stuff whizzing around, but all the energy really should be coming from the front of the sound. Like most people when they're listening, they're not dancing around. They're just either sitting, traditionally facing speakers and things like that. I guess these days you could have stuff from different angles and it wouldn't matter as much. But at the end of the day, it's not going to work for, say, headphones and things because you have your ears here and you can't move things around in that sense. So, it was all tastefully done. But it wasn't even that subtle. As I said before, it wasn't subtle, but it is great when, particularly with vocals and as you said, like guitars and stuff, you really can, and using doubled content. That's the one thing, even I was showing a mate my studio today who hasn't had a chance to listen, and I went through the same show that I gave you, and to hear stuff like anything by like Queen, Queen already have, like vocally, they would have done so many vocal tracks because, what's his name? Freddie Mercury just loved, a choir of vocals and things like guitars. They like quad recorded their guitars and stuff so they could put that stuff when they did the remix into Dolby Atmos in the sides, and it just gives the whole thing weight and fullness and stuff. So one thing I found interesting, actually I'd like to know your thoughts first on, you listened obviously, as you said, in your AirPods spatial audio, you've been listening stereo on your speakers. Did you listen to both the stereo non-spatial version as well as the spatial version in your ears?
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell
I often
me your
flick back
thoughts
and
on
forth.
that. Yeah, tell me your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So to put the disclaimer at the start is that I now listen to spatial audio as my default. So if I'm going to listen to music on the phone with my AirPods, I'm immediately in spatial audio listening to Dolby Atmos as my first place. For the main point is that I want to be immersed in it as much as I can. As someone who assists artists creating their content and creating their music, I want to know what's trending and what people are doing with it so that I can help artists achieve that themselves in my studio. But I also have found that even on AirPods, and while it's not true Dolby Atmos, it allows you to mix the elements in your mix wider and deeper than the normal sort of stereo spread. So if I know we're talking about headphones, but if we just think about speakers for a second. So if we've got stereo speakers, and we're sitting in the middle of them, we're in a sort of a triangle. If we're in the perfect listening scenario, we're in a nice triangle between the speakers and we're sitting down and listening to the piece of music. And I know most people don't sit down in the middle of their speakers and listen to music these days. They're around the house doing stuff. But if you were to do that, when you pan something in your mix all the way to the right, it's often that the sound will feel like it's coming from as wide as the speaker is, or maybe just a tiny bit further because the sound is bouncing off the wall in the room. It's making it feel a bit wider. And one thing that I like in your room is because you're in Atmos and you have side speakers and you have rear
Surround.
speakers.
It'll be Atmos eventually.
In surround. You can literally pan something in the right speaker or the rear speaker, which means you can kind of pan things beyond what you would expect to be able to pan things in stereo.
Yeah.
And what that allows is that the soundstage, and the soundstage is sort of the three-dimensional space that all of the elements in your song sit, and they all occupy a piece of space. When you just have stereo, I'll try and make it like a visual thing. Say if I got a cup, say I've got this cup here, this teacup here, and I've got to fit all the elements of my mix, the drums, the bass, all the guitar parts, the keyboards, the vocal, it's all got to fit in this cup. Stereo is like this cup. As soon as I go into Atmos, there is so much more space to put everything.
It's like a bucket of tea.
It's like I've just gone to McDonald's and they've supersized me and I have this giant cup.
Yeah.
And what that means is that I can process all of the sounds much more delicately, and all the sounds can be bigger and richer because there's space to put them.
Yeah.
So I think if I come back to the cup analogy, when I'm mixing a track, I think to myself, if I'm going to fit this cup of marbles, say I'm going to put all these marbles in this cup, I might be able to put 3 big marbles in this cup and then put a bunch more small ones in there. Or I could put lots of small ones in there. Or I could put one really huge one and then a couple of mediums and a couple of smalls.
Yeah.
I think of that as in when I'm mixing, as in there's a certain amount of space. Do I want to feature something or a few things really big and it's in full glory, and then sprinkle all the elements in? And I think Atmos and spatial audio gives you a much bigger cup that allows you to have much bigger marbles, which are the elements in your song.
Yeah.
I know it's starting to get a bit sort of hippy-jippy now.
Yeah, I don't know why you'd have marbles in a cup, but all right. No, it's all right. It works.
Hopefully
I
it
like
makes sense visually to people
100%.
to think about it.
The idea that you've got different, or you could have different size marbles. If you're going to do tea, you can only have one cup of tea, right? Liquids don't. I like the use of having different size marbles, right? You can have the dominant big one or small one. So it does definitely make sense. And it is true. Like everyone who mixes Atmos is like, there's more dynamic range, which is basically talking about that. There's more room to fit elements. And so that's why they're loving it, because not only do you have, it's not that, we're getting probably technical here, but the loudness wars where you're literally trying to cram everything to make your mix the loudest mix. There's a set level, so there's so much room to now fit everything. But then you've got so many elements you can fit all the way around you and stuff, which is, it really is great.
Now, I didn't actually answer your question. So just to quickly answer your question is, yes, I have been listening to spatial audio on the AirPods a lot, and I do flick back and forth. And one thing I find is that when I flick back, I feel like all the sounds come really close to me. Like all the elements come immediately closer and everything feels a little bit more claustrophobic. Everything feels tighter together. And it feels a little drier. So in the audio terms, we use dry as a sound for when it doesn't have much reverberance, and then wet when it sounds like it's more in a space.
Yeah.
And Dolby Atmos kind of fills in all of these gaps and spreads everything out, even from a distance point of view. So the elements that were further away are even further away, and the elements that were close feel like there's more space around them.
Yeah.
So I've found myself enjoying Atmos or spatial audio. I would say for 95% of the content, there's still a handful of records that I don't prefer it.
Yeah.
But I do prefer it most of the time.
Yeah, I'd say style, or depending on the content, because that close, intimate vibe may work for the album. Like that might be the intention. They may have recorded it purposely really dry and very, intimate. So to go to Dolby Atmos would ruin that effect. A couple of things I found. So I agree. I think I really enjoyed. So basically with spatial audio or Dolby Atmos on Apple, you're put in this like fake room that it sounds like everything's reverberating off the walls. So it's almost like listening with speakers, right? That's the kind of vibe they're going for. And to give you that artificial sense that you're listening to multiple speakers in a room. And I do love that. Agree that it just almost glues things together a bit as well. The one thing I did notice heavily though when I changed, and it could be, so I've got the Beats something Pro, which is basically the same as yours that you're wearing now, the AirPods, same speakers and modules and whatever. It's just housed differently. But I found that the bottom end really got pulled away when you went from the normal stereo mix to Dolby Atmos. I felt like you lost a lot of the bottom end and low mids, which for an album like this, to me, is pretty crucial. So I think that it would be, if I didn't get to switch between the two, I probably wouldn't have noticed it, or I wouldn't have cared as much. But when I jumped from one to the other, I was like, oh, I feel like the mix, and it would be for different styles, but particularly for this album, felt like I lost a lot of good low energy. But yeah, as I said before, if I listened to it without having the comparison, I probably just wouldn't care or notice. But, when you compare, that's when the issues come. But listening to it in surround sound, as I said, I'm going to Dolby Atmos soon, and I'll be able to get the height speakers as well. But there is no comparison. Spatial audio, and I know it's going to be time. They're going to keep perfecting it. And it's so odd. I remember having a conversation or hearing a conversation where they were like, why does Dolby Atmos with speakers, why is it so different to wearing just headphones? Because we still only have two ears, and it must be the resonance of everything shaking your head. It's the way it's bouncing off your ears, bouncing off your body. There obviously is so much more to listening to multiple speakers than headphones, but it is odd. We still only have two ears that I'm still listening to music. So why does it not translate as well as having multiple speakers? And there's obviously lots of scientific reasons for that, but yeah.
I think it's the room reflections, which I think they're working on algorithms, like you mentioned before, to put you in a virtual room in your AirPods. But I just don't think they're quite there yet.
Yeah. And the head tracking, I think the head tracking thing, which they haven't perfected it. There's a few things I've noticed with when you turn head tracking on, so you can, with certain headphones, you can turn head tracking. And if you're watching something on an iPad or whatever, when you turn, this dialogue still comes out of there. And it's those moments that it feels more real, because if I'm in my room and I'm listening and I just kind of tilt my head to listen to the rears a bit more, that's where you get that sense of surround vibes, where without head tracking, you don't get that sense as much,
Yeah. I really dislike that feature.
Yeah, I don't listen to music like that. I might put on a film sometimes like that, but even then it's not perfect, because I think the one thing I've noticed is it uses the gyros or something within it. And so if you can correct it. So what it does is it works out where your neutral point is. And when you turn your head, it obviously keeps the dialogue where your screen is. But if you turn your head for about 3 seconds, the dialogue moves, and then that becomes your default, because it's based on where, where you're resting. So if I'm resting looking at something, that becomes the default. So if I turn, it stays there. But if I turn and look there for about 3 seconds, the dialogue starts coming out of here.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I haven't given enough time to experiment, because I turned it on and I was listening to something and I turned my head around. I'm like, why would I want?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I want the dialogue or the vocalist to be right in front of me? It felt really odd.
Yeah.
And it felt like it was taking me out of the music experience. So I really should test it again, but I have turned that off.
The only reason I'd use it, and I still haven't used it a lot, would be when I'm watching content, say a film. Sound doesn't make sense because you want the singer to be right here. I think to get that surround sound vibes of a film, it makes sense that the dialogue's coming out of a face that you're looking at. So you're looking at the face on the iPad. So when you turn, the dialogue.
Do you mean the face of the person?
Yeah, the actor or whoever. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Sorry, thanks for clarifying. But yeah, when you're listening to music, you're not looking at the singer in front of you unless you're watching a video clip or a live concert. So it makes sense when there's a face that you're looking at, an actor or singer, but it doesn't make sense when you're just listening to music.
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's very interesting. I do think the spatial audio, and I imagine that your surround sound experience, and maybe next time I'm over there, I'm gonna try and put this album on to have a listen to how they're using it. But while subtle, I know Olivia has a lot of BVs. She loves her backing vocals, and they create a spacious, airy sort of atmosphere, and definitely elevate the choruses and take them up a notch sonically. And they also love their little flourishes of instruments. So you often hear like little pianos just doing tinkles and stuff just for ear candy. It just keeps things interesting.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time they have quite simple arrangements. While this, some of this bigger band stuff, there's some great sort of more complex arrangements. Some of her previous work is quite simple. So the flourishes and the synth work, I think could be quite interesting in surround. So if you are listening to this album, it's called Messy by Olivia Dean. Listen out for the like delicate blends of instruments that are like hiding in the background. There's a lot of pairing of instruments. So something that might feel like a piano, you realize is actually blended with other things as well. So there's a lot of cool layering and sonic interest in it. And yeah, I can't wait to see what track she drops next in the album, because
I'm looking forward to going back and listening to back catalogue and hearing, because you said it's changed a bit. So it'd be great to go back and hear her, her original stuff. So we're going to do our new other regular segment. It's going to be Ben's top tip, or I don't know, Ben asks Ben a question. We don't really have a name for it. So if you've got a
we should find a name for it.
Yeah, well, maybe, if someone has a good name for it, write it in the comments, let us know. But are you happy to move on? On to the next
let's
bit.
hear the top tip.
Well, it's a question for you then, mate. So
Okay.
how do we get the best listening experience? You're talking about, you now listen to spatial audio, but how, particularly for someone listening to Apple Music, how do we get the best experience we possibly can?
Like on the go, on headphones or AirPods, or?
I would say yes. If you're listening, most people are listening on AirPods or listening on headphones, Apple headphones. How do you get the best experience out of your Apple streaming experience, even though I just said that?
Yeah. It's good to recap. So I guess there's a couple points. The first one is to, in a busy world, to monotask. So if you want the best music listening experience, would be to not do too many other things while you're listening to music. Carve a little bit of time to like find a nice comfy spot, whether it's outside or inside, laying on your couch or whatever. Just really like listen to music as the thing that you're doing, because I feel like you can listen more and you can really appreciate. So while that's not a technical thing, that's something that I love to do.
It's a great tip, because who of us do that anymore really, is just sit and listen to just music. Yeah. That's it. That's why that's why I got the record player, because we actually would just sit and listen to a record and sip a cup of coffee or have a glass of wine and just listen to it, because it's an effort to put it on, but to take that, just take that chunk of time to sit and listen. It's great. It's a good tip. Good pre-tip.
But that was a pre-tip, because the real tip is what I think will benefit your listening experience if you're on the go or wherever you are on the phone, is to increase the quality of your streaming settings.
That can be done.
I know talking through a few, absolutely. Talking to a couple of my friends, it's become apparent that a lot of people aren't complete nerds like I am and don't go through settings of applications to set them up the way you want them.
Yeah.
And by default, most of the streaming services will start streaming sort of what they call standard quality, which is very similar to, I would say, a high quality MP3, which is, while it might seem okay, it's actually quite compressed, which means you're losing a lot of the nuance and the tonality as well as the spatial elements of your mix. So if you're on an iPhone and you're listening to Apple Music, my recommendation is to increase the quality of your streaming, as well as turning on the Dolby Atmos setting to auto, so that if Dolby Atmos is available to you, it'll automatically switch on and give you that experience. So if you're wondering how to do that,
I was going to ask you, how do you do that, mate?
How do you do that? So go to your phone settings, your normal phone settings, and scroll down to when you see Apple Music icon. And once you click on that, you'll see an option there to turn on lossless. And what that means is that you'll start streaming the quality that was produced in the studio. So by the producers, mix engineers, and mastering engineers, it's very likely that the lossless version will be the quality that they produced in the studio. And then in those settings as well, you'll be able to turn Atmos onto auto. So that will give you the best quality coming to your phone, and it'll turn on Atmos when it's available. And if you want to turn on spatial audio, if you're on an iPhone, you kind of swipe down from the top hand corner to get to your toolbar, which my camera isn't focusing, but you can see that I'll come back here.
Point
that's
at it.
The toolbar.
Yeah.
And then you can long press into your volume control. And at the bottom here, you can't see it at the moment because my AirPods are actually connected to the computer. But there'll be a few settings down here, one of which will be called spatial audio. You can press that button. So that will give you the sort of spatial audio experience that we've been talking about today. And that's also where you can turn on the head tracking on and off. I would suggest turn it off.
Definitely turn it off. I think because it does noise cancelling as well. So most people should know the settings are in there for noise cancelling, but then obviously next to it there is the Dolby Atmos ones as well, So I've been Spotify till recently. I got Apple Music so that I could listen to spatial audio in my room in surround sound, and I didn't look at those settings until you told me, mate, so I appreciate that. And actually, interestingly, with the settings, with the quality, you can set whether it's if you're on Wi-Fi or 5G, you can set it to go lossless. But if you're not on that, you're on 4G or 3G. Because interestingly, when I was listening to it in the car today in preparation for tonight, a couple of times it cut out because I only had 3G and I put lossless on everything and it just stopped streaming. So I've turned it back to the standard for 4G or 3G and then gone lossless for everything else. So
that's a really good point. And I should put a disclaimer is if you're on a phone plan that has a very little amount of data or you're traveling, you might want to change that setting back because it will use more data streaming it.
Yeah, cool.
That's my top tip.
That's a great tip, mate. Thank you very much.
Audio experience.
Well, it helped me today, so I'm glad that we can share Ben's top tip.
Yeah.
Cool.
Very cool. Very cool. So, I mean, one thing I'd like to know is from when you listen to music and your experience. So obviously you have dabbled in vinyl and listening to that as an experience, and you have a surround sound set up at home. When you're listening to music, something that you haven't heard before, have you ever tried to listen to it with your eyes closed?
Mostly,
is that something you do at all?
Mostly when I'm at your studio because...
Oh, really?
Well, your monitors are just delicious, and I've found myself doing it in your studio because particularly when you're showing me the orchestral stuff, if you close your eyes with your monitors, it's like you're not listening to anything coming out of speakers. There's just an orchestra sitting in front of me playing delicious music for me. My mate who I showed the studio today actually said the same thing about my space. He's like, I just feel like, obviously because I got good speakers and I've got it well tuned, he's like, I'm not listening to a recording. I'm listening to the band playing the song. Like you lose the speakers, particularly because you're surrounded as well. It's so easy to then feel like you're just sitting in the middle of a room listening to the band play to you. I would say even more than when it's stereo. But when I listen to orchestral stuff in your room, because the three-dimensional vibe of your speakers, it really like has the same effect anyway. But no, I don't. I really should. The
reason I asked that, and this could be even like a bonus top tip, to be honest. I'm giving you triple tips today.
Yeah. Love a triple tip.
Triple tip.
Yeah.
Is that when you close your eyes, you're shutting off one element of your sort of sensory experience, one of your senses.
Yeah.
And it elevates the other senses. So something that I do all the time, like a bit of a strange Joe, is to sit here and when I'm enjoying music and stuff, I'll turn the lights a bit lower so they're not as distracting. And I will sit there and with my eyes closed, listen through the record or listen to my favorite song. And what I find is I really listen to it. Like it gives me an extra 40% of brain space to take more information through my ears, and it allows me to hear all the nuance of everything that I'm hearing. So,
and less distraction as well, right? There's things
less distraction. Yeah. Absolutely. I'm all about, which you'll probably, as you listen more and more of this podcast, you'll realize that I love to monotask and to do things exclusively
with intention.
With intention. Yeah. That's a really good way of saying it. Yeah.
You should put that on a t-shirt, mate.
With intention?
Yeah.
Or listen with intention. People might just think that people aren't listening to me.
Just with intention. Keep it simple because you do other things with intention. I'm starting our merch.
Is this you? I was about to say that.
Yeah, starting our
This
merch.
is the subtle announcement of our merch line.
If anyone wants a T-shirt called With Intention, I'll happily make it and sell it on our website that doesn't have anything on it really yet. So
if you want some merch, what are we getting people to comment?
There's got to be a T-shirt emoji.
Comment a hat. Give us a hat.
Yeah,
Give us a hat
any
down.
kind of merch emoji. So whether it's a T-shirt, a hat, someone with clothes on, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or just put I want a T-shirt, or just write with intention. Maybe they could put with intention in the comments.
Yeah.
It's also this is great interaction because I'd like to just know if someone's still listening to this podcast. 40 minutes in, 50 minutes in.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah.
And while we're asking people to leave comments, I love discovering new music, as I'm sure you do, Ben. So if there's an album that you've been listening to that you think is sweet and you want us to have a listen to it, let us know what it is. Because
we'd always like
up for new tunes.
Yeah, new tunes and new content to review or dissect.
Yeah.
I honestly need to spend more time in my studio. I feel because I'm a hustler, not the nude kind, but I just constantly, I'm trying to create stuff or do new business ideas or, I need to sometimes just stop hustling and I'd say with the way you listen to music, it's almost like a meditation. I need to just take some time to meditate and consume stuff in this studio because I've, as I said, going to Dolby Atmos. I'd love to do some Atmos mixing and I really need to study everything else, but not also, I don't want to sit here and be working because that also sounds like work. I just need to sit here and consume and just take in great content, great artistry, all that sort of stuff. So,
yeah.
Cool, mate.
Do it.
I will.
Let's you should do it after this. After this podcast, put on a thing, put on a tune, close your eyes and feel it.
Yeah, well, now I've got to listen to Olivia Dean's tunes now, all the other ones. So I might take that in. All right, mate.
Awesome. Well, great to chat to you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And let's do it again soon, eh?
Sounds good.
All right, mate. Catch you later.
See ya. Bye.